I think my job is so creative that between all of that, it's super rewarding and meaningful. But it's definitely not something that, I envisioned for myself, 10 years ago because I didn't know it existed.
Hello, welcome to the Flute 360 podcast, where we incorporate a panoramic view of flute-related topics. I am your host, Heidi K. Begay, and this is episode 115, Military Flutists, with Staff Sergeant Brittany Primavera. The Flute 360 podcast and JK Media Productions are teaming up to help you with your student and professional needs. I, Heidi, offer consultation work to both music students and professionals alike. If you are a student who needs help studying for graduate pre- and post-music exams, editing a research paper, interested in flute lessons, or needs help with job applications, I am here for you. Also, I have been currently working with ministries, music publication companies, and other music professionals to help them with their online projects. Whether you need creative or social media help, I would be thrilled to work with you. My husband, Eric, has been an audio and video engineer for over 10 years and owns the JK Media Productions company. If you are someone who takes or gives music lessons via the web and need help with equipment and or setup, feel free to reach out to Eric. Lastly, he is well skilled with audio and video edits for your next creative project. Please contact us today at heidikbegay.com and jkproductions.media so we can get started working towards your professional goals. We look forward to hearing from you soon. Hi, Brittany.
Hi, Heidi.
How are you?
I am doing super well today. How are you doing?
Excellent. The last time we spoke was about a month ago when you were kindly guiding me on whether or not to pursue this career path. And so I thank you for that.
It was very fun. I enjoy talking about my job.
Yeah, and I could hear that in your voice, and I instantly thought, oh my gosh, we have to do a series on this. So yeah, I thought, from our conversation, we completely have to do a series on this just because of the passion and the excitement that I heard in your voice about your job. And I thought, man, we need to really bring this information to the surface for others to possibly consider it.
Yeah, I think that sometimes all of the options aren't always readily apparent when you're looking at a career in the military. And personally, I found the best way to know what's out there is just to ask questions.
Yep. Yeah, so true. And, to ask the people that you know. And if they don't have the answers, then they probably know somebody to put you in touch with.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just this great, the world is so much smaller than we think it is.
Yeah, especially in the flute community.
Right? So for those who may not know you and your story, can you please share a little bit about yourself and your musical background?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Staff Sergeant Brittany Primavera. I am from Texas, and I went to the University of North Texas for both of my degrees. I really liked my experience there. I'm a student of Dr. Mary Karen Clardy. And within my program at UNT, I also did some additional coursework at the Janáček Academy of Music and Arts that's in Brno in the Czech Republic. And I also did a study in Nice at the Nice Academy over one summer. Well, I guess during school, I had a private studio in Dallas. I taught about 50 kids a week, middle school and high school students. That was a really fun experience because it's like a little lab, right? So maybe you're learning how to teach vibrato, or you're teaching double tonguing, and you have 10 students working on it. So it's really fun because you can see how each one reacts to the instruction that you're giving. And I found it just really, it was very challenging to teach that many students sometimes, when you're working 5-6 days a week in addition to school. But it's also just this really weird and unique experience that doesn't really exist outside of Texas.
Right. I mean, it's a very unique musical culture.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So after that, I moved to Lubbock, Texas. If you're not familiar with Texas, I was in the Dallas area, which is in North Texas, and I moved like almost as far west as you can go. So I laughed because Heidi and I lived in Lubbock at the same time.
And we never got to see each other.
Yeah, it was so weird. Like the flute community is so small, but I don't think we ever saw each other. But I was just there briefly.
Okay.
So I guess it makes sense.
Well, like you're not supposed to have regrets in life, but just seeing how we're getting to know each other and forming this new friendship, I really kicked myself in the rear because we were in the DFW area around the same time, never saw each other. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I was teaching 50, 60 students also in DFW from 2009 to 2015.
We totally were in the same place twice and had no idea.
I mean, that's ridiculous.
I mean, Texas is really big, so.
Yeah, it's big, but then to be in the same area at the same time as flutists doing the same thing, I'm sorry, I'm just kicking myself in the rear for that.
Well, same.
Yeah. But maybe our lucky stars will, line up and we'll be in God knows where at the same time in the in the next chapter of our lives.
Yes. The different seasons. That's so funny. Yeah, so in Lubbock, my husband was there teaching college. He was finishing up his doctorate at Texas Tech, where you went to school. You probably knew him. He's a tuba player.
David.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, He's a really good friend. And we took, I think, one class together, and then we were in suite together.
Yeah, okay.
He's a really sweet guy.
I like him.
You'll keep him around.
Yeah, he wrote me every single day when I was in basic training. Aww. Every day. Yeah, and I still have those letters. Not to get too mushy, but...
No, not at all. Claire, the oboist, who is the senior airman, that's her title. I want to change it to senior airwoman so bad. But she just had this romantic story about her and her husband doing boot camp together in the Marine Corps. So you are not at all mushy. There's a lot of romantic stories going on today.
Yeah, it's just so funny because, like, who writes letters anymore? So it's so, like, old school. Yeah. I've got, like, 90 letters from him somewhere.
Oh, I love it. So you went out to Lubbock.
Yes, so David was teaching at Wayland Baptist University and Lubbock Christian University. And when I moved out there, the stars aligned and I was teaching adjunct at Lubbock Christian. And there's not a lot to do in Lubbock. David he loved it so much. Like, he was ready to have a tumbleweed farm and just, like, live there. And, like, that was it.
Yeah.
But so there's not, too much to do. So I would just, like, teach and practice. And I just started taking, like, every audition that came open. And eventually I won a position in the United States Army Fife and Drum Corps. So I enlisted in the U.S. Army in Amarillo, Texas. It was super fun. Actually, like, driving up there, the Cadillac Ranch is on the way where they have, like, those big cars stuck in the ground. Right. And yeah, the Amarillo MEPS, the military entrance processing, whatever that's called, it's where they, evaluate you to make sure you meet the qualifications for enlistment. They're called the littlest MEPS in Texas. It was so cute. They had, like, Bath and Body soaps in the bathroom, and
nice.
It was really endearing. Texas has some cool small towns. Now I live in Virginia. I work for the United States Army Band Pershing Zone now. I work in their public affairs. I got that position in December, so it's fairly new. And I do a lot outside of work. So I play principal flute with the Old Bridge Chamber Orchestra, which is near my house. I'm a program director and a flute instructor for the Virtual Flute Academy. And I'm on the board of directors for the Capitol Wind Symphony, which is in Washington, D.C. It's a wind band. So I'm a huge believer in creating opportunities for yourself. And, I really like collaborating with others. So I have a lot of freelance that I do as, a musician and photographer or like social media person. So, recently I did the social media management and photography for the Mid-Atlantic Flute Convention, which was super fun.
Well, that's so cool. That's a huge convention that happens annually.
First of all, I worked the convention with my good friend, Rachel Minto, who I became very good friends with in the Fife and Drum Corps. And she also worked in public affairs. I actually, the Fife and Drum Corps was courteous enough to lend her to the Army Band because we have so much going on right now. We needed another person. So I get to work with her again right now. And I'm so happy because she's incredibly talented, not just as a flute player, but with her social media skills. She's very good at like video editing and, finding those details that really make something over the top. So it was fun to work this Mid-Atlantic Flute Convention with her because we sort of like we each had our camera and, our cell phones logged into the accounts we created for Mid-Atlantic Flute Convention. And we just sort of split up the convention. So we were in and out of like every room. I got to hear almost everything, which is a big change because the last couple of years I've like played in everything. And when you do a lot of playing at a convention, you don't get to hear anything.
No. Yeah. Especially if you're running a convention, you're just, like backstage and making sure to put out all fires.
Yeah, I guess you might have experienced that with Texas Flute.
Here and there, not too much. But when you're working with incredible people, like what I'm hearing you working with your friend, you have a good team and somebody supporting you through those endeavors.
Yeah, it's definitely easier when you find someone that you work really well with. We always joke that the two of us put together are like three people because we get so much done. Like when you find a rhythm with someone.
That is true. And that's priceless.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool. So you mentioned when you lived out in Lubbock, far, far west Texas, that you were taking auditions. What inspired you to take that particular audition? Yeah.
So when I started taking auditions, I noticed that I would get farther into the process on piccolo auditions. So I made sure to stay in shape. And a position came open for the Hellcats. So the United States Military Academy at West Point, they have their band, right? The West Point band. And then they have a field music group called the Hellcats. And a good friend of mine is in the band up there. And I thought, okay, I'll submit a tape and see what happens. And so I guess they call it the semifinals. That's where you send in the tape. And, if you're selected, the great thing about auditioning for a special band is the Army pays to send you to the finals. So when I went up to New York and took that audition, that's when I first really started to seriously consider the military. I was able to see how well my friends were doing there. And the military seemed really appealing because of, benefits and stability. And I had a lot of friends in all the bands because, at North Texas, a lot of people choose that career path. So there were plenty of people that I could talk to, sort of get some insight into that career. So I really liked what I saw at West Point. And, that was sort of a lifestyle I could see myself in. So a couple months later, I guess, the position came open with the Fife and Drum Corps. So I thought, well, that's another special band. I'll submit a tape for that and you can audition on piccolo. So that's what I did. And I was invited and I won. So that's how I ended up here.
Congratulations.
Thanks. It was a good time. I spent about 3 years in the Corps and, well, I guess it's a little, almost 3. I always forget basic training happened.
It sounds like when I talked with Sonia this morning, she had mentioned that basic training almost felt like a dream.
Yeah, I texted a friend of mine this morning, like just to double check because I know that it was 10 weeks, but when I think back, time wasn't real. So, yeah, it's like you forget it was a thing until, you remember it was.
Or when you're on a podcast and the host is asking you, so what's like basic training like? And you have to recall the time and say, oh yeah, I did that.
Yeah. Well, and like in all seriousness, definitely wasn't pleasant.
Okay.
But like personally, this sounds like so weird, but it can be an empowering experience because you get on the other side of it and you realize that you're a lot tougher than you thought you were. And you can do things that you never thought you could do. Yeah, like I happen to be hidden talent, super great at shooting an M4. And I told my husband at graduation that I could shoot something from 300 meters, and we were losing it because I'm a Texan that's never shot a weapon before basic combat training.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I didn't know those Texans even existed.
Yes, I am one of them. We just never had weapons in my home growing up. Like, we weren't hunters.
Yeah.
We were more of like the Texans who had like dogs and land.
Yeah. So you're good at it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have to requalify on weapons anymore. So I didn't continue, but at the time I was good at it. I think it's fun learning a new skill, right? Like, we spend so much time perfecting our flute playing. And when you get to basic training, you're not playing the flute. But I think it was like one of those skills that I could kind of like hone in on, like practicing, you know, like your breath has to do with it, right? Like if you have to breathe a certain way to make sure that like the weapon's not moving, or you have to take care of your equipment. So it was like one of those strangely satisfying things. You could practice and you would get better at it.
Yeah. And you can see the parallels between, like what you just said, cleaning your weapon and cleaning your flute, and breathing with the shot and breathing with the music. So I can see the parallels there.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And just even, I don't know which lady it was, but they were mentioning about how their platoon, they were learning about their weapons and shooting and all that. And one of the drill sergeants said, okay, these are your fundamentals. And she literally said, okay, I know all about fundamentals, air, posture. Let's see how this translates over into, you know, this craft. And so it's cool to hear the similarities between what you're bringing up and the other ladies.
I think that when you're a musician, you can find those similarities in a lot of things, and it makes it a lot easier, if that makes sense, right? So, for example, performance anxiety, right? You have to pass, you know, your weapons qualifications in order to be a soldier. And, you know, you're not on a stage with people watching you. You're like holding something that maybe you haven't held before, this weapon, and trying to, you know, shoot something from different distances and different, you know, you have to do it laying down or standing or kneeling. So, you know, there are different parallels. And I feel like, you know, a lot of musical training, like the discipline of being in a room alone with yourself, listening to, you know, the sounds that you're making and, you know, trying to make sure that they're what you want. A lot of that discipline translates super well into the Army.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. So we're talking about like how your music training actually helped your military career. Can we reverse it? What lessons did you learn in the military that has strengthened your musical skills, if any?
Ooh, that's a good question, Heidi. let me think for a second.
No, you're fine. Or maybe if it's not a new skill, just in the sense of it strengthens something. Like you just talked about performance anxiety. So do you feel like, let's just say you had performance anxiety before the military, right? And then after learning how to shoot your gun and you having to make the target, well, it's either hit or miss, right? So there's not much time for anxiety to creep in. You got to do the job at hand, right? So now that you're more in the moment and ready to hit that target, and you're like, okay, yeah, my nerves and my butterflies are going away. Have you seen that translate over to the stage?
I mean, I think I've seen myself become a lot more decisive and confident. I wasn't someone, thank goodness, you know, that experienced like any kind of severe performance anxiety. I get the adrenaline rush like anyone else, believe me. But I think for me, though, maybe I could be a bit, you know, indecisive about things, you know, like how I would phrase something, or like very common musical insecurities about like, you know, did I hold this note long enough? Or, you know, is this really enough dynamics? And I feel like after going through an experience where like every bit of you is tested, right? Like basic training is meant to be chaotic and simulate combat. So you don't freak out under combat. You know, you're in there with medics and drivers and everyone. So I feel like after handling some of those situations and handling the people handling those situations, it's kind of given me a different perspective to make decisions. I guess not just in flute playing, but, you know, when organizing other things, right? Like concerts or organizing people for performances or missions.
I love it. Sorry to put you on the spot, but it was just...
No.
So you said that basic training wasn't the most fun. Can you talk to us about that experience? Like, what were some of your highs and lows and all of that?
Well, I can say for some of the highs, like you do find small moments of beauty, which sounds crazy, but I went to basic training at Fort Leonard Wood. That's in Missouri. It's the only time I've been to Missouri. And it's actually really beautiful. Like if you weren't there for basic training, like there are woods, right? There's like a nickname people call it, Fort Lost in the Woods, because it's just beautiful. There's trees everywhere. It's gorgeous. So when we have field training exercises where you're like camping in the woods, basically, right? You have to like build your own tent out of a poncho and sleep on the ground. Or when you're on the range, like learning how to shoot, you're surrounded by woods and nature. And, you know, sometimes when the weather is better and the drill sergeants are far away, it's kind of nice, actually. Like for me, my favorite part was probably the ruck marches, because you're just walking. That's probably like a loaded statement because you're also like a little bit beat up and probably sore. And this rucksack is super heavy, but I'm a taller person. I'm like almost 5'9". So the way I'm built, it wasn't super difficult to carry the rucksack and also the weapon. So I just like started walking, and then you just like stop when they tell you. So, I mean, it's a very long hike basically, but for me, it was just like great because you're just walking and no one's yelling at you and you're in nature. So I found it to be kind of like a moment of beauty. Like they tell you in the Army to hunt the good stuff. So that was definitely some good stuff. And of course, I always looked forward to mail because, like, you know, sometimes we wouldn't get it every day. And then I'd have like 3 letters from my husband or friends. So I think those were really nice. I think probably one of the worst moments I remember is I went in January and it was so cold. And being from Texas, I don't experience cold or do super well with it. So I was just freezing all the time. And I remember I got bronchitis. They give you some kind of a shot to help prevent upper respiratory infections. And then it gave me one. So I'm like, I'm so miserable and I'm so sick. And I didn't want to go to the doctor because I had it in my head that if I went to the doctor, like I wouldn't graduate on time, which is crazy, but I was afraid to go. So I'm just miserable and like I'm not sleeping very well. And I remember we were like sitting outside on cold metal bleachers eating like cafeteria food, and I was too cold to eat. And like one of the drill sergeants from the other platoon came up to me and was like, "Primavera, it's going to be okay." Like, like I must have just been sitting there looking so miserable that a drill sergeant actually came up and comforted me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was super sick. I eventually did go to the doctor and they gave me medicine and I got better. So, but I think that I could offer some advice for anyone about to go. I've thought about this because I heard the episode that just aired and I was thinking like, you have to have your why sorted out before you go. Right. And I feel like for musicians, for us, we already know what it is. It's the job on the other side. But sometimes you need more than that, whether it's like your family or like you're going to use, you know, the Army benefits for your college or, you know, whatever it is, like you have to have that sorted out so that when things are just totally unbearable, you know what to reach out for. So, yeah. And like I personally had a mantra. I don't know if you're a Netflix user.
I am.
Yes. So there's this show called The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt.
It's my favorite.
Okay, so do you remember the scene where she's in the bunker and there's this crank and she doesn't know why, but they have to keep turning the crank?
Oh, yeah. I can vaguely remember that.
Yeah. So what Kimmy says, because everyone else is freaking out, and she's like, guys, we just turned the crank. I know it's hard, but anyone can do anything for 10 seconds. And so when I was in a crazy situation, I would just tell myself, like, I can do anything for 10 seconds. And I would like literally count to 10. And I kid you not, I always made it through those 10 seconds. So then I would just count again.
Wow. That's a lot of groups of 10 seconds.
It was definitely a lot. But no, I mean, if I can do it, anyone can do it.
Yeah. But I can see that being a very good tactic and a way to approach it, because 10 seconds is tangible. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, yeah, but if you think bigger and you think, oh, you can do this in 30 minutes, you're like, 30 minutes of this? I can't survive 30 minutes of this. But you're giving yourself something that is attainable and you can reach. You're like, oh, yeah, I'm going to feel really good when I hear second 10, click in my head. And then you go at it again. So that's really commendable.
Yeah, it definitely got me through some tough times.
Yeah. No, I love that. And that can be applied to anything. Okay, you can do 10 seconds of your research paper. Okay, 10 more seconds. Cool. So you're in boot camp, you graduate boot camp, or you guys have been saying basic training. Is that correct?
That's correct. Basic combat training.
Okay. So maybe I'm using more of a Marine Corps term.
I'm not exactly sure where that comes from. A lot of people say it. I mean, my grandpa says it. And okay. I mean, maybe he did go to boot camp. Like where he went doesn't exist anymore. So like that must just be lingo.
Maybe it's like in the movies that I've seen, like maybe it's more of a civilian thing. Huh.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, so you leave basic training, and do you enroll in the Army School of Music for Advanced Individual Training or no?
So that's a very good question, and I should clarify this. So I did not go to advanced individual training. I went directly to my unit. Okay. So there's as an Army musician, no matter what your instrument is, there are two sort of paths you can take, right? So they're defined as our military occupational skill. So a 42 Romeo or 42R is a regular bandsman. So that's where, you PCS or you move every couple of years. You come in as an E4 specialist. The Army has the best rank that you can enter in as an E4 specialist. That's where you go through the band liaison before your recruiter and you audition for them. So the other path you can take is the 42 Sierra or 42S. That's a special bandsman. So if you want to apply, for example, to be a flute player, as my good friend, specialist Allison Wallen mentioned, the Army needs flute players right now. So you could go to a band liaison and request an audition and do that and enter, as a flute player and do basic combat training. You can do AIT, you'll get your loans repaid and all these other great benefits. Or you can wait for there to be an opening for a flute player in a special band. So the Army has 4 special bands. There's the one that I mentioned, the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. You can be in their band or in the Hellcats if you're a flute player, right? There's the Fife and Drum Corps, which I was in. There's the United States Army Band Pershing Zone, which I'm in now. And then there's the United States Army Field Band. That's the touring band. So the difference is when you win an audition for a special band, right, you have to wait for there to be an opening and then you go and take the audition. You get a letter that says, here's your spot. It's in this unit. And you take that letter to your recruiter and you're good to go because you already did your audition. When you finish basic training, you go directly to your unit. And then, some of them, like the Fife and Drum Corps, they have their in-house training. So I still did 3 months of training for marching and ceremonial protocol and learning the fife. And then I was promoted. Or if you're in the other bands, you get promoted pretty quickly, maybe a couple weeks. So the benefits of the special bands are that you enter in as an E6 staff sergeant. Now, you can still get to staff sergeant in the regular bands. It may take you a couple years, but you'll still get there. And the special bands, you also don't move around. You're permanently stationed at your duty station. So that's it. Like, I will live in Washington, D.C. until I get out of the Army. So I won't be moving around. There's other things too. It's a give and take, right? So I didn't get any bonuses for enlistment. I don't have any student loan repayment. But I do have education benefits. I could go get a doctorate if I want. It's also going to take me a really long time to reach E7, right? Sergeant First Class, because generally with the special bands, people stay in them.
Oh.
You know, someone in the regular band field might get promoted before I do. So it's a give and take. So it just depends on like what's a good fit for you right now. And a lot of people will go back and forth. I've heard of people going from special bands to National Guard bands or reserve bands, you know, which have that part-time component. Or I've heard of people enlisting and going into, you know, they call them the Romeo bands. So I've heard of people going into those first and doing AIT. And then, you know, a position comes open in one of the special bands and, you know, they want to switch to one of those. So they'll take that audition. So, yeah, you do have options within the Army. There are those. They're just different, you know, bands. So like speaking from experience, I went to the Army School of Music maybe a year and a half ago to give a master class. The Fife and Drum Corps sent some flute players and some fifers, and we went and taught. And in the class that I taught, there were some amazing flute players in that class. There was a Carol Vincent student. Like, it's not like a, you know, judgment on the caliber of musician where you are. It's just different. It's what happened to be open and who played how they wanted that day. And
yeah.
So yeah, or if you had time to wait for an opening, you know, oboe openings don't come open a lot, you know, or flute openings, really.
Yeah.
So, you know, or for someone, it might be a better fit to do part-time, you know, in the reserves or the guard. So to answer your question, I did not go to AIT, but I did have a lot of training when I got to my unit.
Oh, yeah, for sure. No, and I really respect how you just said, you know, in that master class or AIT, sorry if I heard you wrong, but there was a Carol Vincent student there. And you know, and I think that's commendable and that's very respectable that people, you know, we have to consider all, I mean, we don't have to, and listen to me, but it's good to consider different paths, no matter your educational background or where you currently are at, because I don't think anything is really beneath you. You know, like if it's a job opportunity, you know, you can make it your choice to grow in that position. You know, it's your choice to, you know, what did they say? Bloom where you're planted. If you think everything's beneath you or some things are beneath you, you could potentially miss out on a great opportunity and a great career path. I think I'm saying that right.
Yeah, I think you are. And like I said, I think it's all about what's best for you and your path, right? That's exactly what you're saying. Like, everyone's career is different and you have to choose what's best for you. So, you know, there are people who want to go the 42 Romeo first because they want to get their college loans repaid. And honestly, that would have been a really smart financial decision for me. And I've thought about it before, like, man, if I could do it again, I could just join earlier, get like 60 grand of my college loans repaid, and I would be in like a really nice financial situation to move somewhere else. So, you know, if you have a lot of student loan debt, I would suggest going Romeo first. If you want to try for a special band, that's great. But if you want to get your loans paid, that can be a really good option. So again, it's like talking to people who are in different situations and seeing what their story is. And, you know, you can learn something from everyone. And I think that can help you create the life that you want.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the other thing I like in that too is just because you went to UNT, which is a very prestigious music school, or Juilliard, and let's say you don't win the principal position of the New York Philharmonic, does not mean that you're less of a player. You know what I mean? Like, was that opportunity available at the time? Yes or no? You know, what auditions did you take or what chances did you take? And so if you accept another offer, then maybe your end goal, you know, sure, New York Philharmonic is your end goal. Still reach for the stars. Go for it. But just because you're doing these steps, along the way to get there and accept a position here or there in different seasons of your life does not mean you're any less of a musician.
Yeah, and I've been on the other side of auditions now. At the Fife and Drum Corps, I helped some of my friends prepare for their pre-screenings. And, some of them went through and some didn't. And it's very interesting because, I saw them through that process. Or my office right now in the Army Band is over the minor studio, which is the smaller recital hall they have. So I hear the prelims of every instrument that comes in. So I've heard everything, like trumpet auditions, saxophone auditions. And, I think all you can do in these auditions is, try to do the same thing every time and play how you practiced it. But it all comes down to how everyone plays that day and what they're looking for. And you can't control those things. Mm-hmm. You can only control, sometimes you can only control how you play. So that's how I always had an outlook for myself when I took auditions. And I found the more I tried to detach emotionally, the more successful it went, and again, that could have nothing to do with me. It could just be how everyone played that day and what they were looking for.
No, very well said. So for the musician that's out there and really loves hearing about your schedule and what this career entails, what advice would you give to this student or professional who's considering this career path?
I would say to stay in shape on your instrument. I know for myself, watching the openings come up, it would sometimes be a couple months or a year between openings, right? So between the orchestra audition I took and the West Point, it was a couple months. And then between West Point and the Fife and Drum Corps, it was a couple months. But, when you watch the flute openings come up in the different military bands, it can be years between them. So if that's your goal, you need to stay in shape, whatever that means for you. And I would especially hone your sight reading skills. I watched a lot of the euphonium players, especially at North Texas. They would create just books of marches and, go through them because eventually, sight reading, unless they're writing it for that audition, could be something that you've seen before or, something similar. But just that skill of reading music accurately for the first time is good. I would also prioritize your ability to play with rhythmic integrity. In the military, if you're playing a ceremony, musicality is not super important. Rhythm is because there's soldiers marching to it. So don't add a tenuto somewhere because someone might trip. So, when I took the audition at West Point, they were like, you need to play this tempo 116 because that's, what the cadets march. And when I got to the Fife and Drum Corps, it was like, no, we play at 96. That's what the troops march at. So there's, they give out these sort of things. So I would make sure that you can play something from start to end at one tempo as close as possible. I used to do things where I would start the metronome, record myself, start the metronome, turn it off and play and go back to the recording and try to put the metronome with what I played. And it can be pretty stressful to do that in the beginning, but eventually you get a little bit better at it and that can really help you. And I would also say, before you sign on the dotted line, talk to someone in the organization so that you know what you're getting into. So I can't speak to the Romeo band field because I wasn't in it, but I can speak to, where I am now. So if, someone was interested in an organization I'm in, they should talk to me and I would be happy to share my experiences. So I'm sure because our community is so small that someone maybe who just won a job with the field band or is getting out of the Fife and Drum Corps or is transferring from, West Point to somewhere else. Talk to them about their experiences, ask them, for their picture and you can compare perspectives and really decide what's right for you. Everyone's career path is certainly different, but you won't know if this one is right for you unless you ask and you get that information.
Yeah, very well said. To use your resources wisely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The metronome trick that you just gave is shared also in Sharon Sparrow's book. Do you know of it?
Oh, I bought it at a flute convention recently, but I have not opened it yet.
Well,
but no, I have it.
Yeah, she actually gives that same advice with the metronome.
Yeah, I found it to be very valuable. It's very honest. So you can't really kid yourself like, no, I definitely played that right. Like, no, you'll go back and have a perspective on how you're doing, but it does get better. And I mean, that's something that's certainly valued in the military to, rhythmic integrity. But when you're playing bolero, you have to make sure you have enough 16th notes in your tied rhythms, so it can definitely and should transfer to other spheres of performance.
Yeah. And she gives the same advice for the tuner to have your recordings playing and then turn on the tuner. It's objective. Either you're playing in tune or you're not. And so I like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. So as we're wrapping up this awesome conversation, are there any last sentiments that you would like to share with the listeners?
Yes. So something I would say is to be open to many things making you happy. You're going to have different seasons of your life, and you could be doing something different in each one. So for me, as long as they're all centered around music, it makes me really happy. I never thought I'd be doing public affairs for the Army Band, but one thing led to another, and it was a very organic move. So I don't feel like I'm compromising anything about my flute playing by having a day job that isn't specifically performing, because I do a lot of, paid and unpaid performing, teaching, nonprofit work on my own time. And I think my job is so creative that between all of that, it's super rewarding and meaningful. But it's definitely not something that, I envisioned for myself, 10 years ago, because I didn't know it existed.
So what I'm hearing from that is, maybe a student who is currently in school or soon to be graduating, it's important to cast your net out wide. Don't limit yourself, because you could really miss out on some really cool experiences with some really neat people. And, it's good to have goals too and say, I do want to be in this position at this time or whatever. And, more kudos to you, but life doesn't always happen that way, right? And so if you're so limited, you can maybe cut yourself short.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I always knew in college, I just needed to be better at flute. So I would just do things to be better at flute, whether that was, doing a study abroad to get outside my comfort zone, or, practicing more or whatever. But I didn't have a very specific goal in mind. I want to be in this organization, or I want to be doing this. I knew I liked collaborating. So, I started a chamber group, or, I knew I liked certain things, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do for a career. I just knew I had to be better at flute to do it. So I think, maybe you don't have to be that open, but I think certainly having an open mind will open you up to more possibilities.
Mm. Oh, yeah. Very cool. Awesome. So in the last portion of the show, I do a fun segment called Picks. Do you have a pick for the listeners today?
Yes, I do, actually. So right now, as I'm sure many listeners are, I can't stop baking. And my friend gave me some sourdough starter. So I've been making artisan bread, and that's been super fun. And, while I'm doing all of the kneading and all of that, I'm rereading, or, sometimes using the audiobook, the Harry Potter series. So it's my first reread, and I'm ready to get my heart broken. And I'm really enjoying it. Noticing a lot more the second time around.
You're anticipating what's to come, and you're just I love it. I'm ready for my heart to be broken.
Yeah, it's really hard to read anything after you finish that last Harry Potter book, because you're I will never read anything like this ever again.
Oh, shoot. Well, my friends at Tech actually, I was a little older when I went back to get my DMA. I needed a break between my master's and my doctorate. And so some of my friends who were pursuing their DMA did not have a break between master's and doctorate. And so they were 5-6 years younger than me. And they insisted. I mean, I had never up to that point, and this was 2015, I had never seen a Harry Potter movie. And they were like, no, we cannot be friends with you if you have not seen a Harry Potter movie. And so they made me one weekend, like, do this Harry Potter, like, binge. And I think I got through, like, 4 or 5 movies. And so it's really good material. I love it. I just had never gotten into it before. But, yeah, I definitely relate to Hermione.
Yeah, I love her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read the books when I was older. I was like 26, about to go to basic training, and it was December, and I was shipping out in January, and I was like on book 5. And so I had to finish them before I shipped out. Like, you can't go to basic training not knowing how it ends.
Yeah.
So I spent all of that December trying to finish the series so that I could, like, go to basic training in peace. And I did it.
I love it. And it brings this whole conversation full circle from your pick all the way back to basic training.
Woohoo! We did it. I'm high-fiving you.
Nice. A virtual high five. Oh, shoot. Well, thank you so much, Brittany, for your time, talents, and energy. And I just so loved learning from you. And we appreciate the expertise you have given and the advice you have given, and we are so thankful for that.
Thank you so much for having me on. I am a longtime listener and so excited to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're so kind. And it was completely my pleasure. Thank you, Brittany. You have a great day.
You too. Thanks, Heidi.
Today's sponsor is brought to you by J&K Productions. Did you know that not only are they a production company for podcasts, but they are a recording company for musicians? Any musical recording needs that you may have, J&K Productions can fulfill that need. They have all the necessary equipment and expertise to record your next flute recording for college or graduate auditions, competitions, summer festivals, or a flute album. J&K Productions can record any setup imaginable, from solo flute, small chamber, flute and piano, and much more. Consider J&K Productions for your next recording project. Contact them at jkproductions.media. Thank you for listening to the Flute 360 podcast. For more information, please visit HeidiKBegay.com. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review in the iTunes store. Let's talk about flute.